Let's see if we can record to the cloud. It says it's recording, so I hope it's recording to my account. Welcome, everybody. It's Monday, the 25th of July, and we are, Decker and I made an arrangement because I will be traveling back from Washington State to back to California on Wednesday. I'm actually gonna do the whole lecture today. So we're going to have some time, 2 hours. I don't know that it'll take the whole time. If we finish early, that'll be it. We'll have a short practice today. So I'll go some, we'll take a break, at our normal time, and then I'll do the rest. And we'll finish SOSI section 3. That's the goal for today's lecture. And then on Wednesday, and Todd, remind me, I'm going to email you my login and my password, just in case I'm not around.
Right. I'm going to have to host it.
Right. So if I can, because we have unlimited data, so if I can, I will definitely join. And thank you, Aiden. And so I will send you that, but in case I'm in some weird, place or whatever, you can host it, and then I'll catch up using, just like our kids, I'll catch up using the recording. So Decker will cover, and actually it's funny, there are only 2 more art pieces left in section 2 or 3 or whatever it is.
4.
For 17. There are only a couple of them left anyway for art. So we'll both be finishing sections this week. And that's really a great timing, because it means that next week, as we wrap up kind of the summer sessions, we will have finished 2 of the categories. And really, with chemistry being one of the categories this year, it's almost like finishing up 3 of the categories.
There's a section 5 in the art with 4 more works. I hate to burst the bubble.
Well, but you have 1 more section left, right? I also have 1 more section left.
So yeah. We will finish.
So we will finish like
soon.
The early August.
Yes.
We start school August like 17th. So my thought is,
late.
yeah.
Wow.
Oh, so we are.
I start school August, nothing.
Yeah. Nobody likes a braggart. That's not nice. Nobody likes a braggart. Okay. So let me say I'm on Glenn's laptop. I think it's doing well. It's plugged in. We're cool, but it's definitely a whole new world for me here. I am going to go back to where we were when last we left our intrepid explorers by playing this 1-minute video that reminds us, it's the same video we ended with last time, but it's going to remind us essentially that Hamilton negotiated a deal. If you wanted to remember at all, he essentially thought that his economic plan, because he's the Secretary of the Treasury, he wanted the federal government to take on the debt for the newly United States. And a lot of people didn't want that, especially states that had already paid off their debts. Plus, a lot of people thought it was a little bit shisty, because it would be a lot of people in northern Boston area that had the money to loan the government to do this, because it was not, the government didn't have tax money or anything. Like, the government was just borrowing money from private citizens. And so people kind of felt this was kind of awkward. And a lot of the southern states especially were like, I don't think so. And so the compromise here was to put the capital of the new United States in a southern area. It's funny because as a New Yorker, I don't feel like Washington, D.C. is so southern, but that's the way that it goes. It kind of is sort of southern. We call this practice log rolling. That's not a term that's mentioned in the packet at this time, but it is in the econ packet. It's a modern day term for what he did, which is like I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of thing. So let me play this video as a quick reminder of where we were when we left off, because it's gonna kind of lead to something called the Whiskey Rebellion. You know how Shays Rebellion was kind of motivated people, and this is why we thought that this should be a thing. So here we go. See if it plays.
One-minute history. The first Congress of the newly established United States deadlocked on two critical issues. James Madison and the Southern states.
You can't hear it.
Can't hear it.
Okay. Let me try this.
Are pushing to move the seat of government from New York City to a
Better.
Hold on.
That was it, getting it.
It's not, you can't hear it at all.
We could hear it. It was just that the volume was too
At
low.
the end, it was good.
Okay, so I'll go back and start it over again. Rockin'. All right, share screen. This one, share sound and share. And now let's rewind it. Rewind. You're probably wondering how I got here. All right, let's try it again.
Maybe louder.
1-minute history. The first
Good.
Congress of the
Is that good?
Good.
newly established United States is hopelessly deadlocked on two critical issues. James Madison and the Southern states are pushing to move the seat of government from New York City to a location on the Potomac River outside of Virginia, an idea rejected by Northerners. Alexander Hamilton leads the Northern states, who want to create a national bank and pay off the states' debts from the American Revolution. Southerners oppose the assumption of debt, fearing the idea of a strong centralized national government. Thomas Jefferson invites Hamilton and Madison to dinner at his estate and helps broker a compromise. Southerners will not block legislation on the assumption of state debts if Northerners support the relocation of the seat of government. Passage of the Residence and Funding Acts of 1790 establishes U.S. credit at home and abroad, which allows Thomas Jefferson, as president in 1803, to finance the Louisiana Purchase.
Nope, stop talking. All right, so that's where we left off. Well, that's we left everybody. That's where we left off. Okay, so I'm gonna just drag this. So Hamilton's bill passes, and awesome, which is, you know, a trade-off or whatever. But the way that he funded it was partly by selling bonds to private citizens who then gave the government money and going to be repaid, you know, 10 years from now or 20 years from now or whatever. But that wasn't enough. There couldn't raise all of the money that way. So instead, he also put out a tax for everybody. And the tax that he put out was on whiskey, the alcohol. And he considered a whiskey tax a luxury tax. What's a luxury tax? Well, it's what you, a tax that you pay on something that isn't really necessary in your life. So if you, for example, need, I don't know, in today's day and age, let's say milk. In American society, we drink a lot of milk or bread, or you know, foods in general or whatever. So if you pass a tax on something that is really important in terms of like, you really can't survive without it. In California, that would maybe be gasoline, like you almost can't survive without driving around. It's a tax that basically everybody has to pay. And that's, you know, often a lot of people say that that's unfair or more unfair, because it really can hurt people, especially poorer people who don't have a lot of money. And if all of a sudden it costs more, that's problematic. A luxury tax is something that actually even people who are often anti-tax are sometimes okay with, because the idea is you put it on something that nobody needs, a luxury car, for example, or silk, I don't know, something like that. So you say like, oh, well, this will cost more money. And if you have money, you decide you're still going to buy it. But if you don't have money, you just give it up and, you know, no harm, no foul. And so Hamilton thought of whiskey as something that was a luxury. You didn't need it to live. If you wanted it and could afford it, great. But if you didn't, like, that would be okay too. However, the farmers who were living on the western frontier of that, which are already not like totally bought into this idea of, a new United States, but the farmers who were living out and on the western border by the Appalachian Mountains really disagreed that it was a luxury tax. Why? Because they would grow grain and they would sell some of that grain for, wheat or corn or whatever to, millers to make bread or cornmeal or to just eat corn or to give it to cows to eat or whatever it is. But grain is very big and heavy and bulky, and it's hard to ship, especially in the 1700s when we don't have like a cross-country railway or anything like that. And so they would often take all of that extra grain and distill it down into alcohol, because alcohol is much more, you can take, that much corn and make it into that much alcohol. And that's how they would sell it. And they would sometimes sell it for money, but sometimes they'd use it to barter. So they'd go to the local store and they'd say, well, I need, I don't know, meat, or I need cloth, or I need, I don't know, needles or whatever. So I'll trade you this whiskey that I made for those needles or that, cloth to make my quilts or whatever it is. And so by taxing whiskey, they were running into the issue of these people now not being able to sell or barter nearly as much because it would cost so much more. So who would want it? So they didn't buy it from them. So it really hurt those farmers. And so it not only was it an undue hardship, but there were already economic crises in place. This is the same kind of economic crisis area that had sparked the Shays Rebellion, a few years earlier. Just like in Western Pennsylvania, now we have the Whiskey Rebellion. They gave it a sample at statewide epidemic of foreclosures on property in Berks County, Pennsylvania, which is just a place in Pennsylvania. 68% of the people who could be taxed had been foreclosed upon. And that means that the banks had come and taken their land or their houses away from them. And it was worse farther west from that. They put that in there. I put a little like yellow bill, like a note in here. Most of the time now, when we say, how are we going to fund this project? It's a mixture of taxes and other bonds and other ideas. That's how we fund projects all the time in Kern County. The term in economics that has come up post-Civil War. So what they did is it was happening in 1786 and 1790 and 1794 and whatever, but the name for it didn't get put into place until after 1865, so like almost 100 years later. It's called pork barrel politics, and essentially it's the idea that you throw in sort of little things that are positive or sometimes negative for a local area into a big bill that you think all of the Senate or all of the House of Representatives is going to pass. So you kind of like throw it in there and you're like, oh, sell bonds, everything is great. Also whiskey tax, just pass this bill, and everybody votes for the bill. And then the whiskey tax people are like, wait, what? We instituted a line item veto now to stop that, where the president can say, like, I'm signing this bill, except I'm editing it, I'm crossing out this line first. I'm not going to reject the whole bill, but I'm going to get rid of this whiskey tax. That was not implemented until the 1990s. Like I think Bill Clinton was the first one to line item veto. That being said, literally, there was a whiskey rebellion, and that is, like Shays Rebellion, a problem. And so I'm just looking at the chat real quick and seeing if anything is going on. Okay, so what's the Whiskey Rebellion like? Well, same idea as Shays Rebellion. Starts not violently, with petitions to local governments and conventions asking for the whiskey tax to be repealed. The whiskey farmers were ignored, just like Shays and his compatriots were ignored. And so it turned violent. Wait, come back. The federal officials were, I'm gonna move all my stuff out of the way here. Hang on. Okay, so they tried to prevent people from collecting the tax. More than 500 armed men attacked one federal tax inspector's home, guy named John Neville. If you've ever read Harry Potter, I just, sadness, picture Neville getting attacked. He had attempted to serve subpoenas to delinquent distillers. That means that he went around and he was like, hey, person who is making whiskey, you have not paid your whiskey tax yet. You need to pay this. And if you don't, you have to appear in court. And if you can't win in court, we're going to come and take your lands. And the conflict turned deadly. So this picture over here is his mansion was burned to the ground in 1794. A Neville with his slaves and a small federal detachment who was trying to keep the peace met 500 rebels, and the rebels were killed. Fascinatingly, not the whiskey guy. Washington turned to his cabinet and was like, "Hey, what should I do about the rebellion?" And most of them were like, "Tell them no, go in there and attack and everything else." Only the Secretary of State, who is actually weirdly, it's misnamed. It's the Secretary of State is like the foreign guy. Like he does the stuff that's foreign affairs, international affairs, but is for some reason named the Secretary of State. I don't know why. But everybody was like, go kill him, go tell them no. And this one guy, Edmund Randolph, was like, no, let's help them out. He was the Secretary of State because Jefferson had actually resigned because he and Washington disagreed on international affairs. And so Jefferson was like, look, you're the president. I'm just going away from this. But so he's the Secretary of State. And Washington was like, what do I do? What do I do? So he kind of does both, sort of. He sends a peace commission to negotiate with the rebels. So he sends a federal group to go negotiate with the rebels. But he also says to the Pennsylvania governors and the local governors over there to please send a militia in, like a paid militia, to go enforce this tax. So the peace commission fails, not surprisingly. 13,000 men from New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. It's the size of the entire Continental Army that had just been fighting a decade and a half before, marched to confront the rebels led by George Washington. It is the only time in American history that a sitting US president went and led the troops himself. So this meme is literally kind of weird. In 1776, he was like, taxation is bad. We should fight the unfair taxes. And then, 20 years later, he literally goes to lead an army into battle, a militia, again, into battle, to try to put this down. It's a good question. Like, why would he do that? And it in some ways, it was such a strong show of force by this newly formed federal government that it puts down the rebellion immediately. Like there's just not any fighting, that happens beyond that. So it's in Pennsylvania that they all do this. So the rebels just disperse. There's no real confrontation. Roughly 20 rebels are arrested, but they're later, like, nothing really happens to them. Just like Shays' Rebellion, they make a big show of like arresting them, but everybody gets acquitted, or they don't file charges against them, or they get convicted, but then they're pardoned. It's a lot of like sort of show, right? Don't rebel against us or you'll get arrested. And then we kind of it really showed off the federal government's willingness to fight, to unify its states under one rule, and to do it economically and everything else. After the Whiskey Rebellion, there are really no more armed revolts, no more large scale violence. And Actually, in about 6 years later, the Jefferson administration, who's going to be president number 3, repeals the tax anyway, because he really is sort of like, wow, that was a dumb and unfair tax. Okay, so that's the end of the whiskey rebellion, and Washington serves 2 terms of as president. He doesn't have any opposition either term. Everybody's like, yay, Washington, everything is fine. And he really sort of provides the guiding principles of the new nation. Now, if you follow along in the packet as I'm lecturing, and some people do, or they will, or they'll go back, let me point out that for some reason, this packet, I mean, I know why. Let me rephrase that. This packet talks about who gets elected next and what happens in the election. And then they talk about Washington's farewell address. And the reason they do that is because we tend to elect our new presidents in the fall. If you remember, we just had the election of 2020 a couple of years ago, Biden versus Trump. We elect the new president in the fall in November. And interestingly, we've gone back to the old days where instead of declaring the presidency won or lost at the end of the night, we have like a week of uncertainty while we count ballots. And we declare the winner in November of the next election, but technically that president becomes what they call a lame duck or a president. They are already voted out, or they're already done with their terms. Washington was asked to serve a 3rd term, but refused to serve a 3rd term. And the new president doesn't take over until, I bet you know the date, January 6th, right? Because that's now part of our history. So Washington, they in the packet, they sort of talk about the new election and then Washington's farewell address. I've decided to lecture on it in like sort of, let me talk about Washington. So he gets elected unanimously. There's the Whiskey Rebellion. He leads it himself. He does a lot of other, nation building things. And then here's his farewell address. And then let's talk about the next presidency, the 2nd presidency after this one. But so I've done it a little bit out of order here. Okay, so he writes his farewell address and he thinks about it, not just in terms of thanks for a great 8 years, country. He really thinks about it in terms of what can I leave as advice and thoughts for this nation. So he composes a farewell address. Remember, he's not entirely a verbal statesman, right? He's a fighter. He's a military guy who fought in the Revolutionary War and in the French and Indian War, and and then led our country. So he gets help from James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, they of the Federalist Papers. My mom and I, pause for a second, time out for a second while I say that my mom and I were talking about how absolutely ridiculous the Federalist Papers are, like who can understand them. You have to know, if you're listening at home, fun fact, I have a master's degree in American Studies. My mother has a PhD in English literature and Elizabethan literature from roughly this time period. And we were both like, wow, that's really, really, really hard to understand. And then if you read Thomas Paine's Common Sense, he literally says about his own writing, I tried to make it so that every single person who read it or heard it could understand it. He was talking to an audience where he was trying to tell them why we should be our own nation, why we should start the Revolutionary War and fight against England. It's called Common Sense. It was written like a sermon. It was the most widely read piece of Revolutionary era literature, and it was understandable. And then you get these dudes who are just whatever. They were okay. So back to sorry. So Washington gets these 2 people who are apparently considered great writers to help him write the farewell address. He's we haven't built Washington, D.C. yet. We voted for it, but it's not built yet. That was the whole Capitol building lecture. If you missed it, that's what Decker lectured on last week, Wednesday, the lecture before this. So if you haven't listened to that lecture, definitely go listen to that lecture. The Capitol building takes years and years and years to be built, and in fact was just renovated recently. They put a whole new museum in and everything else. But so Washington is really leading the nation from Philadelphia still, which is definitely more north than DC. Not only did he stand up and give it at Congress Hall in Philadelphia, but it was also published in the papers of the day in 1796. And in his farewell address, he warned of three dangers: regionalism, partisanship, and foreign entanglements. So what's regionalism? It's the idea that you have local interests that would lead to petty differences. He was really thinking about the Whiskey Rebellion there, that different, local groups would sort of get in the way of a single nation's ideals. Then partisanship, which he counseled so strongly against political parties. The Republicans and the Democrats of right now, he really warned us. He was like, don't do this. Have just vote your conscience. Don't ally yourself with a political party. And finally, he worried about foreign entanglements. The French Revolution of 1789 had actually weirdly triggered not only an internal French Revolution, but also an external war of France versus England. And you don't have to know why. But he was like, basically, we should isolate. We are far away, he said, from Europe. Like physically, we are far away. We need to worry about ourselves. Like let those idiots who are fighting amongst themselves deal with their own selves. We should just look at us. And he basically was like, you know what, maintain commercial relations, trade with them, but don't get involved in their BS. That's not a thing that you should do. Okay, fine. Nobody listened to him. Like literally, we have regionalism, we have partisanship, and we're completely entangled. We are like, the superpower that gets involved in everybody's elections. So we listened to nothing that he said. That was great. Okay. So let's talk about we're doing great on time. I think I'll talk about the Adams administration, and then we'll take a little break, even if it's not exactly the right time. So 1796, he's at the end of his second term. George Washington he has not given quite his farewell address yet, but he has been asked to run for a third term. They said, no, we actually didn't have the 2-term limit rule in effect until after Roosevelt in like the 1900s. So don't worry about that. They asked him, they were like, will you serve a third time? And he was like, no, thank you. And so in 1796, Washington steps down. There's no incumbent president who wants to get reelected. So the slate is clean, and we have 2 new people step up. It says participants can now see my application. I have no idea what that means right now. So let me know if there's anything weird going on. I don't have the chat open right now. Oh, there we go. So far, no. All right. So 1796 shows up, and it's the first time that you have 2 people going against each other, because really Washington was just kind of nominated president. I don't know how to say it, like sort of like, hey, here you go. And showing a really good job of not listening to Washington, even as he's still president. They formed political parties. So there you go. They were the Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans, which is going to confuse students for 250 years. The parties, so the Federalists ran 2 people for president, and the Democratic Republicans ran 2 people for president. So there are 4 people running for president under the banners of 2 parties. The Federalists wanted John Adams to be the president, and the Democratic Republicans wanted Thomas Jefferson. So these are both really, really sort of, names that are well-known name recognition. So the Federalists, if you look at this red and blue picture here, it's right there, the sort of more conservative, pro-whole federal government. They're the people who were writing the Federalist Papers, right? Hamilton and Adams and Madison and John Jay. They want a strong central government. They want a strong central bank, right? That's Hamilton's idea. Protective tariffs, that means that they're going to watch out for the things made in America, right? Same thing, kind of right now. The conservatives, that this is what they want. They want a powerful Navy to protect our borders from anybody else. They were favored by businesses, by the wealthy. They have a lot of support in New England. And they really want they're constitutionalists mostly. The Democratic Republicans, which is a terribly named name for us living in this era where those are opposite sides of the table right now. But the Democratic Republicans are it says the Jefferson and Madison. It's interesting that Madison ends up on this side. I said he was part of the Federalists. I'm going to go look that up. They want a very weak central government. They want state banks. They don't need a navy, they're not looking to guard all of the United States or the entire coastline. They're kind of like state militias are fine. They're the ordinary people, right? That's sort of what they want. And so the electors cast votes for two, I know, Aiden, it's really weird. The electors, remember that for the 80 bajillionth time, we are not a democracy here in the United States. The United States is not a democracy. We are a republic. The difference between a democracy and a republic, I'm going to probably say this 1,000 times this year. Democracies vote directly for what should be happening. So if there's a law, the people vote for the law. If there's a candidate, the people vote for like the candidate. The way that a republic runs, and this is literally how it runs, is that the people vote for their senators or their House of representatives, and they the people in the Senate or the people in the House of Representatives vote their own conscience. You see this actually right now. The Senate and the House just talked about protecting gay marriage, and people voted. I didn't get to vote for that. My representatives voted the way they thought their constituents would vote. Maybe not the way I would have voted. So each elector casts 2 votes for the presidential candidates. That gets changed much later by the 12th Amendment, because it was a dumb system like beyond. But so Jefferson wins all the southern states, and Adams wins all the New England states plus some of the mid-Atlantic ones. So Jefferson wins in the South, and Adams wins in New England and mid-Atlantic states, and the final total is 71 to 68 in favor of Adams. So the Federalists win. And then, of course, we have the election, and the second place guy gets to be the vice president. So that's problematic, don't you think? Okay, so again, we'll wrap this up, and we'll take a little break, I think, after this section. So Adams gets elected. He becomes the second president after Washington. You don't have to worry about 3 presidents in this whole year of academic. So Washington serves 2 terms, and then here comes John Adams. It's the election of, you can see, 1796, and fun fact, it's going to flip parties next time. So the Federalists win the first one, probably because they had just won the Constitution too, and they had a lot of power behind them. There's what's the state of the state, or the state of the nation, when he gets elected? Well, there's still that, leftover drama from the Whiskey Rebellion, all that lingering unrest out in the rural areas on the west side. There's a war between Britain and France going on over there. Washington is like, don't get involved. Both Britain and France are like, get involved. And France especially is like, do you not remember that I legitimately showed up? Do we not? Do we the Lafayette? Do we not remember? Like, I literally was the person who was like in charge of your whole strategy for your revolution, like a few years ago. Why are you not here? Blah, 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 blah. So that's an issue. The third problem is that the way the system was structured at the time, Adams and Jefferson run nasty campaigns against each other. Adams wins, and Jefferson's his vice president. So that goes over really well right there. The press was very, very opposed to this election, to supporting him, whatever. John Adams had been the vice president under Washington. Okay, so in true American fashion, the vice president often becomes president afterwards. Literally, Joe Biden was Obama's vice president. He was actually, fun fact that you may or may not know, because you may or may not remember a lot of Obama's presidency, but when Obama had won 2 terms, a number of people encouraged Joe Biden to run. And at the time he said, no, thank you, I'm too old. And his son had just passed away from brain cancer. And so he said, I want to like step down out of politics. And he came back at the end of the Trump presidency to sort of try to see if he could unseat Trump. Even though John Adams was Washington's vice president and cast 31 tiebreaker votes in the Senate, because remember the Senate has 2 people from each state, so it was a tied vote often, which is more than any other vice president apparently to this day. He really complained to his wife about how little he had done as vice president. Then, as now, the vice president is often a very decorative job until or unless, God forbid, the president is assassinated or dies in office. And so he mostly complained about that. A fun fact about literature is that we have a letter that his wife wrote to him, which we will look at later when we do literature next. Uh-oh. What happened? I pressed a button. I hope you can still hear me. If you can't hear me, stop, unmute and stop me. And so he said, my country has in its wisdom contrived for me the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived. He was very annoyed by his position as this. I see that Glenn's like the bottom thing is covering up the bottom of this slideshow. Don't know how to fix that. Not going to worry about it. You guys will all have access to it. Okay, what time is it? 4:37. So okay, so let's talk about this and we'll wrap up the Adams presidency and then we'll take our break. So as we said, the war between France and England was going on, as Nikki pointed out in the chat. Yeah, rip France, sorry. Adams and the Federalists, the one who had been elected, actually not French supporters, much to France's dismay. So France wins the presidency, or Adams wins the presidency, and France is like, remember how I helped you? And Adams was like, actually, kind of like the stability of the British monarchy over the French rebels, which is so ironic. It is like painful, right? The French helped us rebel and against the British monarchy. And now the Federalists are like, we kind of prefer the stable British monarchy over these like upstart French people. Jefferson and the party of the ordinary people, the Democratic Republicans, were anti-monarchists and like, dude, we're rebels. See how we're rebels, like Mavericks forever, dude, whatever. This was going on even before the election, like for reals, this whole thing, right? France starts rebellion in 1789. That's not a date you need to know, but it's a date that for some reason is in my head. So this has been going on for 7 years, 8 years before our election in 1796. In fact, in 1794, John Jay, who wrote 5 of the papers, the Federalist Papers, goes to France and starts to write a treaty that is called the Treaty of Amity, Commerce, and Navigation. Amity means friendship, commerce means trade, and navigation meaning to sail across the seas safely. Because it has this annoying Treaty of Amity, Commerce, and Navigation, it gets called the Jay Treaty after John Jay. But he negotiates it with Britain. So France is like, can you help us? And John Jay shows up in England and was like, hey, let's make this treaty. And France is like, what is happening here? It averts war between us and either of those powers. it kind of smooths over some problems that were there from the end of the Revolutionary War that had, remember we signed the Treaty of Paris, one of the 80 bajillion treaties of Paris in 1783, it ends the Revolutionary War, but there are some issues like, with trade and negotiation and whatever. And this J Treaty fixes that, and helps out with a decade of trade, but France is like, screw you, schmuck. Oh, look, and now you don't have to see it got rid of, oh, maybe when I have chat up, it shows that up. Okay, so there you go. They were, beyond annoyed. Hang on one second. Nope, that's not what I want to do. I'm just trying to move things. I don't like touch screens. So here we go. France was so pissed at us that they suspended diplomatic relations with us in 1796 when we elected Adams. And over the next 2 years, they were like, listen, you're not going to ally with us. We're going to take your ships. So we have this lovely treaty with England about ships and commerce and friendship and, navigation and not getting taken over on the seas. And France is like, screw you. You're stupid. I hate you. We will, how many slides does it go? Okay, so I will finish with the causes of the XYZ affair, and then we'll take our break. Okay, so a French privateer captures a merchant vessel near New York Harbor. So Adams is like, oh, this is a problem because we don't really have a good navy. And so he kind of not only doesn't support France, but sort of has a quasi war, a sort of war, a half war, like an undeclared war, but we're going to mess with each other. This is like what happens with, when you have, like kids fighting in the back seat, like, so they're not actually like fighting, but they're like kind of fighting and whatever. So, for the next 2 years after his election, what are you doing, Glenn?
Can I text them?
Can you check something? Oh, he's checking the battery life. This is Glenn. Look, here you are. You're on video. 54%. We're good now. No,
Oops.
you just check. That's fine.
Right.
All right, thank you.
I don't have the microphone
Okay.
like this.
I know. I don't like it because it sits up. Okay, so American ships harassing French ships, they're allies with England and whatever else. And the US fears a French attack. Why do they fear a French attack? Well, because we're stupid. And so, sorry, we're not stupid. It's annoying. So basically, to worry about this, the Congress actually creates an army. Remember, we don't really have one. We have militias that are like paid and volunteers from the states. And in 1798, we have our first real army, like paid for by the federal government. And the Navy gets reestablished and everything else. Okay, so what is the XYZ affair? Nope, I'm gonna go back to here. Okay, so Jay's treaty that the US negotiates with England. The French get all mad at this, right? And so they start to seize ships, right? Everything is good. The US government goes over to France to try to negotiate so that the French maybe don't mess with our ships. That was the theory. We send a couple of advisors over to France, and 3 French agents who work for essentially the French foreign negotiator come to the American people. They're 3 French guys, and they come to the American delegation, and they're like, hey, if you want to see our boss, Talleyrand, if you want to see our boss and negotiate with him and talk to him about the French not taking over your ships and kidnapping them and, impressing the soldiers and putting them to work, you got to give us money. Like, we're not going to take you to see him until you give us money. Well, the US was like, oh, nobody asks us for a bribe. We're not doing that. And so they they leave, they won't negotiate. And when it gets told to, essentially when it gets told to Adams, they say to Adams, hey, this is what happened. They asked us for a bribe and we won't give it to them. When Adams reported that to Congress and said, hey, this is why we're not negotiating with them, they blacked out the names of the 3 guys who asked for a bribe on behalf of their boss. And instead, they were like, okay, you've got to, they called them Agent X, Agent Y, and Agent Z. And so it became known as the XYZ affair. I think I have a whole, nope, I don't have it. So that's the XYZ affair. It was this huge scandal. It was really like played up, especially because we were trying to like be mad at France. But part of why we were mad at France was because France was mad at us. And part of why France was mad at us is because we really should have been there for France. In my humble opinion, let me just say. So this is going on, and this is going to be a problem, and it's going to lead to even worse stuff. So I'm going to stop the share right now. Nope, that's a new share. I don't want a new share. I want to just stop my share right now for a minute. Oh, hi, all these new people who showed up. Okay, and it's a little early for break, but because I'm doing the both hours today and it's going to be all SOSI, I'm going to pause it right now. And nope, that's not what I want to do. I just did something. I don't know what I did. Please come over here. And I was trying to see how many more slides I have. Okay, so perfect. I have not many more slides. And so I am going to come back. Where's my Zoom? Sorry, when I'm on my stuff, I don't know when I'm on Glenn's computer, I don't know what I'm doing. All right, so I'm gonna pause. We're gonna take a 10-minute break, although I don't think I'm gonna go anywhere because I'm at my family's reunion and I kind of don't want to leave my little area. So it's 4:48. Let's come back at 5 p.m. If you have any questions, throw them in a chat, but let's come back at 5 p.m. I can say that. Break. What's the video that Aiden posted?
Don't know.
Okay, we'll go look at it after that. All right, I'm gonna pause nope, I don't know how to pause. Please help.
Oh, everybody hates the French? It
Oh,
must be yeah, I'm assuming.
All right, so pausing the recording. Big button. So now we're back from outer space. Okay, share screen. When last we left, there was the XYZ affair. And the not only attention's running high internationally, but remember that Adams is not president of a united Senate or House of Republicans because he's a Federalist and the Democratic Republicans still think he's annoying. And he starts to enact some really crazy laws. And by crazy laws, what I mean are laws that go entirely against the Bill of Rights. If you remember that the only reason the Constitution gets passed in general is because we enact the first 10 amendments, not quite simultaneously, but with the agreement that we're about to, right? We'll pass this, but we have to put on some individual protections, just like we have in the states. We have protections for individual liberties. And that's the first 10 amendments that called the Bill of Rights, and it gets passed almost at the same time as the Constitution. In fact, some states don't ratify the Constitution until they agree to the Bill of Rights and those 10 of the amendments that finally get agreed on. All right, and Adams comes around and is like, okay, I'm so worried about the what's happening in France and the rebellions that are happening in France, that I'm going to enact some really crazy laws here in America that restrict how you can protest and who is even allowed here. And they are called the Alien Acts and the Sedition Acts, but they get sort of grouped together as the Alien and Sedition Acts. They were passed by Congress, which is slightly majority Federalist. That's how Adams wins the presidency in the first place. So the Federalists are in the majority, although not unanimously anymore. And the Democratic Republicans just at that time don't have enough oomph to pass their own, to reject their own laws. They passed first something called the Alien Act, and alien means foreign, right? I mean, we use it for like extraterrestrials, but really it just means foreign or out of our area or whatever. So it gave the new United States, number one, the power to deport foreigners, meaning people from other countries. And number two, it made it harder for immigrants to vote in our election. The old law was if you were here 5 years and had other things going for you, like you were a white man, but if you were here 5 years, you could vote. So if you arrived in 1795, you were getting ready to vote for in the 1800 election. The Alien Act made it so that you had to live here for 14 years. And that restricted the immigrant vote. See, we've been afraid of immigrants since day one, which is funny because we are immigrants here. The other act that gets passed by Congress and signed into law by Adams is called the Sedition Act. Sedition is a fancy way. Oh, hello, Caitlin. Nice to have you. Sedition is a fancy way of talking about what you write about the government. Now, the First Amendment to the Constitution, that number one thing, says that you have freedom of the press. You have the freedom to write what you want. Now, you can't write outright lies, right? You can't say, Todd Decker is, a thief and has murdered 20 billion people. You cannot publish things that are absolutely false, and that's called libel. Like you really can't write terrible things about them or speak them out loud. That's called slander. But if they're true, you can publish them, and B, the whole point of the First Amendment is that you're allowed to criticize your government. That's literally the freedom of the press, freedom to assemble and protest, right? These are all freedoms guaranteed by the Bill of Rights, by the very First Amendment. The Sedition Act made it a crime to publish something false about the government, okay, something scandalous about the government. Now that gets into some gray territory, or something malicious. So you can't publish, back when the Sedition Act was passed, you as an editor of a newspaper couldn't be like, wow, the Alien Act is a really terrible act, and this is, it's awful, and it's anti-immigrant, and we're a country of immigrants, and the US government is dumb for doing this, or we should go help France, or like, those are all criticisms of the United States government, and it made it a crime that was punishable by a fine or by imprisonment. And 20 newspaper editors were arrested, all of whom were conveniently Democratic Republicans. So the Federalists are in power, but only barely. Adams gets elected, and he passes these two big major acts and gets to arrest the entire press, including Representative Matthew Lyon of Vermont, who actually won his re-election from his jail cell. So that was a thing. Okay, so the French are like, hey, XYZ affair. John Adams is like, boom, taking you down. And the rest of the country is like, what the heck? So remember that the press is not an Adams supporter to begin with, and now he starts to shut them down. Okay, like whatever, that Adams. Okay, so the Democratic Republicans are like, what? Whatever, it clearly violates the First Amendment and everything else. So Thomas Jefferson, if we go back to here, wait, oh, I did have an XYZ affair. I knew I had an XYZ affair thing, but I think I've talked about it enough. If we go back to here, Jefferson, where's my thing? Jefferson pairs up with Madison. And he writes the Virginia resolution and the Kentucky resolution. They're basically just two new resolutions. They're essentially statements by the Virginia state legislature and then by the Kentucky state legislature, because they're from those states that basically are like, you know what? Alien Act is unconstitutional and the Sedition Act is extra unconstitutional, and therefore our state doesn't accept them. Our state doesn't accept them. As a law of unintended consequences, this thing that sounds so powerful and awesome now, where two states are like, I don't buy your stupid, you just because you voted it in, I'm not buying that. It ended up essentially making it so that states' rights were on par with, if not above, federal rights. And it's going to be used 65, 70 years later to give a reason for the southern states to secede from the Union, because they're going to say, you're telling us that we can't have slaves anymore. We don't agree with that law. Therefore, we don't have to follow it. So that's a thing. Jefferson and James Madison are horrified by this whole idea, and now it's time for the election. So the election comes along, and basically it's the same people running as were running in 1796. It's still John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson, but now with more anger. The Democratic Republicans are united against the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Federalists are half in favor of re-electing John Adams and the other half in favor of taking out John Adams and putting in a different Federalist, Alexander Hamilton. They liked Adams. Some of them liked Adams because he was anti-French, which was very popular among the Federalists, although not among the Democratic Republicans. But right around in 1800, right before, because remember the election is at the end of the year, and so right before this, he tries to make peace with the French, and the Federalists like being in a quasi-war with France. They like being in a war with France because they think it will make everybody really pro-American and very patriotic and build a national unity, which they can then ride to victory in the 1800s election. So they get mad at John Adams for trying to make peace with this concept of France. Hamilton is trying to get people to side with Great Britain, which is also kind of not how the Federalists want to go. The fact that their two main presidential candidates are doing things that anger both of them basically is what's going to shatter the Federalist Party. It breaks the Federalist Party into two. I don't know if I can draw parallels here. Maybe I can. We'll see, or maybe maybe it won't work. We'll see in November if it works, or in 2024 if it works. If my predictions work. But for example, right now you have Republicans who are very pro-Trump, and you have Republicans who are Republicans but not pro-Trump. And the question is going to be, is that going to break the Republican Party into essentially two halves, a Trump party and a non-Trump but Republican party? And is that split then going to allow the Democrats to win, because people are going to not, to split the Republicans in half? We'll see if that happens in either election. Okay, so let's talk about Thomas Jefferson as the candidate again that lost here when he was against in 1797, the 1796 election. Jefferson wins the southern states, but he loses the first election. He runs again in the election of 1800s. And he's supported by the Democratic Republicans. And he's sort of a very interesting character. We definitely talked about him as a little bit as a person, not last time, but the time before that, when we talked about Monticello. He is this candidate. He's going to, win this election. So sorry to spoil that, but it's totally happening right now. On the reasons that we still like him and appreciate him, well, he helped write the Declaration of Independence. He was a Revolutionary War hero. He was a member of the original Continental Congress. He was the governor of Virginia, and he helped write an act that helped establish religious freedom. We just talked about how he fought against the Alien and Sedition Acts. He was our U.S. Minister to France, which, in my view, is we should have been supporting them. And he had done his time serving in the first two presidential administrations. He had been worked in the cabinet of Washington, and then he was the vice president under Adams. Okay. He was also a states' right advocate. He really wanted American society of yeoman farmers. Yeomans are the owner farmers, the ones who own their lands. He tried to increase property ownership. He thought that federal power should kind of be limited. He wanted to lower taxes, reduce the size of the army, reduce the size of the Navy. He didn't want to owe government debt and everything else. That's all really great in terms of like our American ideals that I hope that you will fight for. Cons, he builds Monticello. We talked about how it was all hidden, all the slave labor and everything was hidden. And he also fathered children with a woman named Sally Hemings, who was one of his slaves. I put a picture of her. She's just, she had no choice. She was 3 decades his junior, I believe. Okay, so they fight it off again. Interestingly, Jefferson is sort of the Democratic Republicans candidate. Those are the ordinary people candidate, and Adams is the Federalist candidate, and those are the more elite people. In a funny twist of fate, if you look at them as people, these two candidates, Adams is actually more of a self-made man than Jefferson. Adams, the Federalist Party candidate, is actually more of a self-made man than Jefferson, who is a bajillionaire and builds a mansion on Monticello on a little hill in Virginia. So Adams was the first college-educated man in his family. He did graduate from Harvard, but he got himself in. He built his long law practices, and he was sort of, his own lawyer. But his political leanings made him seem very elitist. And he ran as a presidential nominee with a guy named Charles Cotesworth Pinckney from South Carolina. Jefferson, who was this bajillionaire, runs with Aaron Burr as a running mate. And we're going to talk about Aaron Burr in just a moment. He had a thing against Hamilton. He was a Princeton trained lawyer, a Revolutionary War vet. He was the leader of the Democratic Republicans in New York. Jefferson and Burr each, remember, you vote 2 people, they each got 73 electoral votes. Adams and Pinckney get Adams gets 65, Pinckney gets 64, and the Democratic Republicans win. So the Federalists have won in 1796, and the Democratic Republicans have won in 1800. So we go from no political parties, which is the George Washington election, unopposed, hey, just be our leader, to the Federalists winning, and now the Democratic Republicans win. This is the first country to ever try to democratically or republicly elect candidates, and the political power switches. So this is huge, right? This idea that one party wins and then the other party wins, and power switches, and it should switch peacefully, is a revolutionary concept. And literally until January 6th of 2021, this was 240 years of this not being a problem for us. In my lifetime, I was born in 1971, right? So we have literally the switching of power multiple times in my lifetime, back, forth, back, forth. Actually, Nixon was the president when I was born. So Jimmy Carter wins in 76, he's a Democrat, and Ronald Reagan wins in 1980, and he's a Republican. And Jimmy Carter is voted out. He concedes to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan wins, and off we go for 8 years of a Reagan presidency. And the same thing happens even in your lifetimes, right? You are all possibly old enough to remember the 2008 elections, right? So Bush loses and Obama wins, and we have an Obama presidency, and then Trump wins, and we have a Trump presidency, and the power switches, and this is what happens. It is a peaceful transfer of power. We have situations in place. Literally during the inauguration ceremony, people break down the White House of the outgoing president and put in new things and new staff and new furniture and everything else of the incoming president. I mean, this is how it's supposed to be. And so this is a not just a presidential sweep, but a sweep through both houses of Congress. In the election of 1800, not only did the Federalist Party lose the presidency, Adams is voted out, but they lose both the House and the Senate as well. Remember, that's partly why Adams is elected, why the Alien and Sedition Act passes, because this is all under Federalist control, and then it is not. Okay, so what am I saying here? All right, so how did this ever come to pass? How did this work? Well, in the old days, the candidate who wins the most votes gets the president, and the runner-up is the vice president. If there's a tie, the House of Representatives determines a winner. So in 1860, remember what I said, that Jefferson and Burr, sorry, I'll point to it using my mouse instead of my finger. Jefferson and Burr each get 73 electoral votes. So now they have to pick a president. How do you, they each have 73 votes. How do you pick a president? So the House is still controlled by the Federalists because they don't leave until January. Actually, I think they don't leave till April at this time in our history. So each House member gets a vote, and they're tying as like who should be president and who should be vice president. Should it be Jefferson, or should it be Burr? Should it be Jefferson, or should it be Burr? Most of the Federalists actually liked Burr, and most of the Democratic Republicans liked Jefferson. They voted 35 times, and every single time it was a tie. Jefferson versus Burr, Jefferson versus Burr, tie, 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 tie. Hamilton, who didn't particularly love Jefferson, but also didn't love Aaron Burr worse, which may explain why he gets killed by him a little later on. He disagreed with Jefferson on a lot of political issues, but he thought Jefferson was the better person. So he overcame his animosity towards Jefferson as a politician. He kind of understood that one of these two guys who he didn't agree with politically was going to win the election, and he thought Burr was an obnoxious guy. And so he went around to his friends in the Federalist Party and he said, look, one of these two guys has to be the president. Vote for Jefferson. Don't vote for Aaron Burr, vote for Jefferson. So the 36th time they tried casting their votes, 10 states vote for Jefferson, 4 states vote for Burr, and 2 states abstained. Jefferson is annoyed at Burr for running against him and not sort of conceding the presidency, feeling like he had done, his time in the government, and Burr was like this little upstart and whatever else. So Burr was bitter. Burr was very, very bitter. Okay. What time is it? Okay, it's 5:21. So I found this. I know Quora is not a legitimate site, but this answer was so great. that I really wanted to include it. And since there's only one more slide left after this, I'm just going to go through this really quickly, because, seeing Hamilton or talking about Hamilton, I feel like this is something that we really should do, like sort of talk about. So the question is why? Why would he do that? Why would he vote for Jefferson instead of Burr? And I just thought that was a great answer. So the first thing that needs to be said is that all the players, Hamilton, Jefferson, and Burr, knew each other well. Hamilton and Jefferson were the two principal officers in Washington's cabinet. Hamilton was Secretary of the Treasury, and Jefferson was Secretary of State or Foreign Affairs, respectively, and were the two de facto leaders of the rapidly forming political parties, then called factions. They disagreed on many issues, but most were adamant supporters of the American experiment. They had done political deals before, like the deal of moving the capital to DC in exchange for the debt funding, so they were really known quantities. Hamilton and Burr also knew each other. Both had fought in the Revolutionary War. Both were from New York, specifically New York City, which was a much smaller place back then. New York was the electoral swing state in the Union at this time and politically hard fought over. Hamilton was the principal political big shot and organizer there, and Burr was the rapidly rising star, an organizer in the Clinton political machine, not Bill and Hillary, the Clintons, George Clinton and DeWitt Clinton and everything. Okay, so Hamilton is a very smart, very ambitious man, and he knew about smartness and ambition in other people. Jefferson was smart and Burr was smart, and Jefferson was ambitious and Burr was ambitious. Jefferson was older, had been minister to France, governor of Virginia, and while he struggled with finances all his life, which is interesting because he built Monticello, he was nonetheless a very large property owner, and to appearances, one of the richest men in America. Burr was much younger, was really scrapping his way up the political food chain very fast, was far too ambitious, was a known double dealer and corner cutter, and was hopelessly insolvent, meaning he was very, very poor and would have been carted off to the poorhouse, but for the protection of his political patrons. So he was using his campaign finance money to pay off his debts. Basically, he was a rogue, but a useful rogue because he could organize and win elections. Now, back then, when you ran for president and vice president, Jefferson and Burr were on the same ticket versus John Adams and Charles Pinckney. They each cast 2 votes, the idea being that the highest vote getter became the president and the second became the vice president. Jefferson was always the senior man in this process, and his party wanted him as president. Then, bang, disaster. All the electors actually did as they'd been impaneled to do, which was to cast 1 vote each for both Jefferson and Burr, but it was a tie. Nobody had really envisioned this happening. This was the first truly contested election in U.S. history, just 4 years before the president was essentially chosen by acclamation just because he'd been the VP previously. By procedure, things now had to move into Congress, specifically into the House, where each state's representative was vote as a block to break the tie and decide who the next president would be. So in the Senate, they each got a vote, and they each voted one the way that they thought they were supposed to. And somebody should have not done that, but they didn't. 1 for Jefferson, 1 for Burr. When it was a tie, it got kicked down to the House of Representatives, which voted each one as a state. 1 vote, 1 state. This is where Hamilton comes in. He was the former Secretary of the Treasury. He'd been the chief political fixer for George Washington. Many people owed him favors. Plus, he was the de facto leader of the Federalist Party. Everybody looked to him about what to do. And the Federalists had a huge block of states in Congress. They could easily tilt the decision about who should be president either way. Meanwhile, Burr, perhaps being the scoundrel that many, including Hamilton, thought he was, Burr saw his chance. Instead of deferring to Jefferson and acknowledging that Jefferson was always meant to be president and that he, Burr, would be the junior man and meant to be vice president, Burr refused to defer or step down. Instead, Burr gambled everything and tried to squeeze out 1 more vote, any vote, to put him over the top, thereby becoming president himself, and he double-crossed Jefferson. The Congress was hopelessly divided. Many of the Federalists in Hamilton's party advocated just giving the president to Burr to screw over Jefferson and give themselves a supposedly weak Burr to manipulate. Jefferson was furious. There were multiple ballots, but everything was still deadlocked. It was a constitutional train wreck. Hamilton saw all of this happening. Everyone was looking to Hamilton for leadership because his word could command the delegates in Congress and tip the election. Eventually, Hamilton decided that while he didn't like Jefferson's policies, He knew Jefferson was a founding father and was totally committed to the American experiment, had great experience, and was otherwise a rational actor. Burr, on the other hand, Hamilton viewed as a rank scoundrel who would do anything to advance himself, and Burr couldn't be trusted. Hamilton sent word to Congress to back Jefferson, and Jefferson was elected the third president. Jefferson never forgave the last slide of this. Jefferson never forgave Burr for what he tried to do. Burr was exiled to the Senate, where he sat watching debates and calling on others to speak. Burr never got anywhere near real power thereafter. In 1804, Hamilton told people at a dinner in New York City stories about what Burr had done and how he was the rankest scoundrel alive. Burr heard about them's fighting words, called Hamilton out, and Burr killed Hamilton in a duel. Killing Hamilton destroyed Burr's reputation forever. He barely could even show his face in public, even though he was the vice president of the United States. Burr went out west, potentially tried to drum up an insurrection to carve out a piece of the US for himself to lead, but word got out and he was dragged back east and tried for treason. Many suspected he was guilty, but he got off on a technicality because there were not two witnesses to the same overt act as the Constitution stipulated. He was found not guilty. To escape his shame and his creditors, he fled to Europe, only coming back years later to live out his life ignored and broke. Jefferson served 2 terms as president and then stepped down following Washington's example. He is generally viewed as one of the more successful presidents in U.S. history. Jefferson and John Adams, who he'd beaten in the election of 1800, eventually reconciled and spent years sending letters back and forth about their great deeds in 1776, the meaning of America, and otherwise reinforcing to each other that while they disagreed about some things, they were both Americans first. Because of the partisan nature of politics, many people feared Hamilton because he was, in so many things, so unbelievably smart and able. After he was killed, many, even his foes, realized that a great light had gone out of American politics. He had an almost unbelievably massive funeral in New York City that essentially stopped the whole city for days. He remains arguably one of, if not the greatest American politicians who never got the chance to be president. And he's on the $10 bill for a reason, Beesies. Leave him there. I just love that. This is the very last slide here, the end of section 3. The election of 1800 was the first peaceful transfer of political power between political parties. Jefferson described it as the revolution of 1800, for that was as real a revolution in the principles of our government as that of 76. In other words, the fact that they were able to transfer power from the Federalists to the Democratic Republicans bloodlessly and just, without question, was just as much a revolution as the American Revolution of 1776. Jefferson became the 3rd president. He was the first person to be inaugurated in the new capital of Washington, D.C. that we just saw in our last thing. The theme of his inaugural address was reconciliation. In retrospect, the election was a decisive shift towards political partisanship and the birth of the first party system. So it was really an example of how since then we have had really mostly only 2 political parties in power, although their names have shifted and their ideals have sort of shifted. That, my darling friends, is the end of section 3 of SOSI. So I thank you for joining us today. I haven't been able to look at the chat because I'm on a laptop here. It's only 5:32, so we are going to end early.
Uh-oh.
We're only going to have an hour and a half long lecture. Look at all these people. So fun? Yes.
You silenced out for 30 seconds.
Oh, is that what happened? Okay, so I'm here. I was saying that this is the end of section 3, and I know that it's a little early, so that's okay. If anybody, of course, has any questions, we should ask that. If you missed my initial introduction on Wednesday, we're going to do the last 2 art pieces of that second to last section. So we're going to do it a little differently because I'll be traveling on that day. So I will be not able to, I will be there. I should be able to be there on my cell phone, but not able to lecture and access my slideshow. So Decker was fabulous and traded me So he will wrap up the last two pieces of art from his second to last section. I am here wrapping up the second to last section of SOSI. And next week, we will both start our very last section. I think you said you have 4 pieces left, so it should be roughly 2 weeks of art. I have only one last section of SOSI, but about 2 weeks sounds about right. And thus, before we start school, we will have completed both the social science and the art, which is phenomenal. And we will be looking ahead to, I think the next 2 things we're going to do are the music and the literature. The music and the literature. Science is chemistry, so we're going to just leave that on hold for a minute, leave that on red for a moment. And the math is trig this year. So
A lot of trig.
a lot of trig. So
Unit circle. Know your values.
if you've taken either college prep, algebra 2, or like trig math analysis, yeah, Nikki, I'm with you, or trig math analysis, you've already done it all. If you are enrolling in it this coming year, it's going to be a race against the clock. We're going to hope that by February, we cover most of it. In the meantime, by the way, Decker is by nature a math teacher, so we will be able to have this. Yeah, it's going to be a review. We're going to do a lot of like math sessions, but we're really going to do, probably we'll do a math test. We should, Decker, at some point we should do like a math placement, like a practice test and see how they do.
Yeah.
And then we'll split people up into like, I know nothing versus I know, I just have to be reminded, or I don't know how to do this fast, which is another thing. And if you took it online, like in the year that we were in COVID, we may need to fill in bunches of holes. And so long story short, that should be it. And then coolly, we will have, we will have done, art, SOSI, lit and music and sort of science and sort of, math, and we'll just have econ left. So we are rocking and rolling here. So looking forward, we're looking at finishing up SOSI and finishing up art, and then getting started with lit and music. So there you go. And I see the chat has exploded. So I'm going to stop the recording. I should be able to post this hopefully tonight, but more will be revealed. And in any case, we're here. Feel free to stick around or not as you need to. So go have a wonderful day, and we'll see you on Wednesday.
I'm going to have to start reading the music.